Plug in and escape. You're listening to Shifter Love. The town of Forks, Washington, existed under a perpetual shroud of gray. It was a place where the sky seemed to weep more than it smiled, where the greens of the endless forest were so deep and damp they seemed to drink the very light from the air. For Alara Swan, this constant gloom was not just the weather, it was the climate of her life. At 20 years old, Alara had perfected the art of being invisible. She moved through the world like a ghost, her footsteps too light to leave an impression, her voice too soft to interrupt the steady patter of the rain. She worked at the Daily Grind, the town's only real coffee shop, a place that served as the social nucleus for Forks' younger generation. And it was here, amidst the hiss of the espresso machine and the smell of burnt sugar, that her invisibility felt most profound. "Just a black coffee. Swan." Jacob Yulee grunted, not bothering to make eye contact as he tossed a crumpled $5 bill onto the counter. He and his friends, a boisterous group of impossibly handsome, muscular young men, took up the corner booth, their laughter filling the small space. They were part of the town's special elite, the old families who kept to themselves, who lived on a reservation deep in the woods and moved with a grace and confidence that was almost predatory. They treated Alara with a particular kind of disdain, a dismissive annoyance that was worse than outright cruelty. They called her the Invisible Girl, or simply Swan, never Alara. It was a constant, low-grade reminder that she didn't belong. "Here you go," Alara said, her voice barely a murmur. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the steaming cup on the counter. He snatched it without a word. She watched them, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. They were vibrant, alive, crackling with an energy she couldn't comprehend. And she was gray as the sky outside. She was a null. Born to werewolf parents, but cursed with a human form she could never shed. Her aunt, Diana, with whom she lived, never let her forget the shame of it. Alara was a glitch in the bloodline, an empty space where a wolf should have been. Later that afternoon, seeking refuge, she escaped into the one place she felt she could breathe the forest, with her sketchbook tucked under her arm and a charcoal pencil in her pocket. She walked a familiar trail, the damp earth soft beneath her worn boots. The forest was her sanctuary. Here, her invisibility was a comfort, not a curse. She could blend in with the moss-covered maples and the towering firs. She could listen to the secrets whispered by the wind and feel, for a fleeting moment, a part of something vast and ancient. She found her favorite spot, a clearing where an ancient oak had fallen, its colossal trunk now a mossy throne. The light, filtered through the dense canopy, was a pale, ethereal green. She opened her sketchbook, her fingers moving with a practiced ease, attempting to capture the way the ferns curled like tiny fists, the way the mist clung to the branches like tattered lace. It was the only way she could truly speak, through the lines and shadows she created on paper. A sudden guttural snarl shattered the tranquility. Alara froze, her pencil hovering over the page. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The sound had come from deeper in the woods, and it was followed by a terrifying symphony of violence, the crack of breaking branches, the thud of heavy bodies colliding, and a chilling, predatory growling that vibrated through the soles of her feet. Curiosity warred with a primal, screaming instinct for survival. Her rational mind told her to run, to flee back to the hollow safety of her life. But a strange, inexplicable pull drew her forward. She moved silently, her painter's eye taking in the chaotic dance of shadows through the trees. She crept to the edge of the clearing and peered through a thicket of ferns. What she saw stole the air from her lungs. It was a battle, not between men, but between monsters torn from the pages of a forgotten nightmare. 3 enormous wolves, each the size of a small horse, were locked in a savage struggle with a creature of pure darkness. It was vaguely canine, but its fur was a matted, oily black, and its eyes burned with a malevolent red light. Its claws, long and jagged, tore through the thick pelt of one of the wolves, which yelped in pain. The wolves were magnificent and terrifying. One was a silver gray, another a reddish brown, but the third was the color of a moonless night. He was the largest, a clear leader, his movements a fluid and lethal ballet of muscle and fang. His entire being radiated an aura of absolute command, of an ancient and untamable power. As Alara watched, transfixed in horror and awe, the black wolf lunged. He seized the shadowy creature by the neck and, with a horrifying snap of his powerful jaws, ended its life. The red light in the creature's eyes flickered and died. It collapsed into a heap, its unnatural form seeming to dissolve into the forest floor, leaving behind only a faint, acrid smell of decay. Silence descended once more, heavy and absolute. The two other wolves, panting and bloodied, looked to their leader. The great black wolf stood over the remains of his foe, his massive chest heaving, and then he lifted his head, his eyes, two pools of molten gold, swiveled and locked directly onto her hiding place. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her trance. He had seen her. He knew she was there. She scrambled backward, tripping over a root. A small cry of alarm escaped her lips. The sound was a fatal mistake, in a flash of impossible speed. The black wolf crossed the clearing. He was in front of her before she could even draw her next breath, a wall of dark fur and simmering power. He blocked her path. His enormous head lowered. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so deep it felt like it was resonating with her very bones. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, for the sharp, tearing pain that would end her insignificant life. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the scent of pine, rain, and fresh blood. But the attack never came. Hesitantly, she opened her eyes. The wolf was staring at her, his golden eyes wide. The murderous rage she had seen moments before was gone, replaced by something she couldn't identify. It was a look of raw, unadulterated shock, of disbelief, of confusion. It was as if he was looking at her and seeing not a trespasser, not prey, but a paradox he couldn't solve. From that colossal, dangerous animal, she felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion crash over her. It wasn't his, yet it was. Loneliness. So profound it was like an abyss, a deep aching pain that seemed centuries old, a desperate solitude that mirrored her own in a way that was both terrifying and intimate. She felt it as clearly as if he had spoken the words aloud. For a long, stretched moment, the world held its breath. There was only the steady dripping of water from the leaves, the beat of her own frantic heart, and the unwavering intensity of his golden gaze. Then, with a barely perceptible shake of his head, he turned, without a backward glance. He and his pack melted back into the shadows of the forest, vanishing as quickly and silently as they had appeared. Alara was left alone, kneeling on the damp earth, trembling and gasping for air. Her mind reeled, trying to process the impossible, the fight, the monster, the wolves. But more than anything, it was the memory of those golden eyes and the inexplicable, heartbreaking sorrow she had felt radiating from the heart of the beast that had chosen to spare her. She didn't know it then, but her life, the gray, invisible life she had always known, had just been irrevocably torn apart. The encounter in the forest left an indelible mark on Alara's soul. She tried to dismiss it as a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare brought on by her lonely existence, but she couldn't erase the image of those golden eyes or the crushing weight of the sorrow that had poured from them. For days, she moved in a daze, the muted colors of her world now seeming sharper, more menacing. The familiar sounds of forks, the rain, the distant foghorn felt like a prelude to something she could not name. Her unease was a living thing, a shadow that clung to her, at the daily grind. The usual taunts from the reservation boys seemed distant and hollow. Her focus was elsewhere, constantly scanning the tree line visible through the coffee shop window, half expecting a pair of golden eyes to be watching her from the gloom. Then he came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the rain falling in a relentless, determined drizzle. The bell above the door chimed, a sound Alara barely registered until a sudden, absolute silence fell over the cafe. The boisterous laughter from the corner booth died. The low chatter of the other patrons ceased. Even the hiss of the espresso machine seemed to have paused in deference. Alara looked up from the counter she was wiping, her gaze following everyone else's. He stood in the doorway, and the word beautiful felt insultingly inadequate. He was tall, carved from something harder and more permanent than flesh and bone. He had the kind of savage perfection one might find in a marble statue of an ancient, forgotten god. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, cut short and artfully disheveled. His features were sharp, angular, each line and plane of his face a study in stern, breathtaking symmetry. He wore simple, dark clothing, a black jacket, dark jeans that did nothing to hide the lean, powerful musculature beneath. He was the single most arresting person she had ever seen. He made the handsome, brawny boys in the corner look like unformed children. His presence was an event, a shift in the very atmosphere of the room. He radiated a cold, potent authority that demanded and received absolute submission. No one spoke, no one moved. And then his eyes found hers. They were the same eyes, a startling, brilliant gold, the color of raw honey, of ancient amber, of a predator's unwavering focus. There was no flicker of recognition in them, no hint that he was the same creature she had encountered in the woods. There was only an unnerving intensity, a chilling focus that made her feel stripped bare. Every one of her insecurities laid open for his inspection. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly inhuman. Every step was deliberate, predatory. As he crossed the small space and stopped directly in front of her counter, the rest of the world faded away. There was only the space between them, charged with a terrifying, electric current. "Alara Swan," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, smooth and cold like polished river stones. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Alara could only nod, her throat suddenly tight and dry. Her name, on his lips, sounded like a verdict. He leaned forward slightly, his golden eyes holding hers captive. "My name is Kaelin Black." Kaelin Black, the name whispered through the cafe like a secret prayer. He was the alpha of the Black Forest Pack, the most powerful and reclusive leader in their hidden society, a figure of legend and fear, and he was here, speaking to her. "You will come with me," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Alara's shock gave way to a surge of defiant fear. After a lifetime of being pushed around and dismissed, some forgotten part of her rose up in protest. "I'm working," she managed to say, her voice a reedy whisper. A flicker of something impatience perhaps crossed his perfect face. "That is no longer your concern." He didn't raise his voice, yet the quiet command in his words was more intimidating than any shout. The boys in the corner booth, who just days ago had treated her with such contempt, were now staring at their tables, their faces pale. They were terrified of him. "I don't know you," Alara said, taking a shaky step back. "I'm not going anywhere with you." For the first time, an emotion broke through his icy composure, a raw, dark frustration. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl that vibrated in her chest. "This is not a request." He reached across the counter with impossible speed, his cool, strong fingers closing around her wrist. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. It was not painful, but it was absolute. His touch was a manacle of steel. She could feel the immense, tightly leashed power thrumming just beneath his skin. There was no escape. "You are my fate," he said. The words spoken so low only she could hear them. The phrase made no sense, yet it landed in her heart with the weight of an ancient prophecy. "My Tian Ming, you have been for some time. You simply didn't know it. Now, we are leaving." He pulled her, gently but inexorably, around the counter. She stumbled, her apron catching on the edge. He didn't stop. He simply tugged, and she followed, her feet moving as if they belonged to someone else. He led her through the silent, parted crowd of patrons who averted their eyes as if he were the sun. As he pushed open the door, a cold, wet wind swirled inside. Alara cast one last desperate look back at the life she was leaving, at the familiar, dreary cafe, at the shocked faces of her tormentors, and in that moment, she realized with a dizzying certainty that her old world, the one where she was merely invisible, was gone forever. He led her to a formidable black Jeep, parked at the curb, its tires caked with mud. He opened the passenger door for her, his movements economical and precise. She got in, her mind a numb whirlwind of terror and disbelief. The interior of the car smelled of leather and pine and something else, something wild and uniquely him. He slid into the driver's seat, the space suddenly feeling very small, charged with his overwhelming presence. He started the engine, and the powerful vehicle rumbled to life. He drove not towards the small house she shared with her aunt, but away from town, towards the deep, shadowed woods where the old families lived, towards the Black Forest territory. The silence in the Jeep was thick and suffocating. Alara stared out at the passing landscape of dripping, gray-green trees, her mind racing. My fate, Tian Ming. The words echoed, nonsensical and terrifying. This was a kidnapping, a strange, cold, and surreal kidnapping. "Where are you taking me?" she finally whispered, the words catching in her throat. Kalen didn't look at her. His golden eyes were fixed on the winding, rain-slicked road. His sculpted profile was impassive. "Home," he said, his voice a final, unassailable decree. "You are coming home." The Black Forest territory was another world. As Kalen's Jeep passed an unseen boundary, the familiar damp forest of Forks seemed to transform. The trees grew taller, more ancient, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dense, living ceiling. Sunlight struggled to pierce the gloom, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of shadow and light. It was beautiful, but it was a severe, intimidating beauty. It felt like a kingdom, fiercely guarded and hostile to outsiders. Alara was an outsider. The truth of that was a cold knot in her stomach. They arrived at a sprawling settlement of large, rustic timber-framed houses built into the landscape. At the center was the largest structure of all, a grand lodge built from massive dark logs and river stone, smoke curling from a great stone chimney. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass, their faces a mixture of awe and suspicion. Their eyes, she noticed with a jolt, were all shades of yellow and gold, like his. They were all like him. Kalen brought the Jeep to a halt before the main lodge and killed the engine. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain on the roof. "Get out," he ordered, his voice flat. He didn't wait for her. He was already out of the Jeep and striding towards the lodge's heavy wooden doors. Alara scrambled to follow, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her back, dissecting her, judging her. Her thin human frailty, her lack of grace, her ordinary brown eyes. She had never felt more like a null, more like a mistake. The inside of the lodge was vast and dim, dominated by a cavernous central hall with a fire roaring in a massive stone hearth. Animal pelts decorated the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and damp earth. This was not a house. It was a lair. A young woman with the same striking black family features and kind amber eyes hurried to meet them. "Kaylin," she said, her voice laced with concern. Is this her?" "This is Alara Swan," Kaylin stated, his tone devoid of warmth. "See that she is given a room. She is not to leave the grounds." With that, he turned and stalked away, disappearing down a dark hallway, leaving Alara standing awkwardly in the middle of the great hall. She felt like a stray dog he had begrudgingly dragged home. "I'm Lyra," the young woman said, offering a small, tentative smile. "Kaylin's sister. Don't mind him. His social skills are underdeveloped." Lyra's friendliness was a small, welcome spark in the oppressive gloom. She led Alara up a wide, creaking staircase to a simple but comfortable room with a large window overlooking the forest. "I know this must be terrifying for you," Lyra said gently, "but he has his reasons. He always does." Over the next few days, Alara existed in a state of suspended reality. She was a prisoner, albeit a comfortable one. She ate her meals in her room, a silent pack member leaving a tray by her door. She spent hours staring out the window, watching the rain, trying to make sense of the new, impossible contours of her life. She also met Julian Volt. He appeared at her door one evening, holding a small stack of books. He was almost as handsome as Kaylin, but where Kaylin was all sharp angles and cold intensity, Julian was smooth charm and warm smiles. His eyes were a lighter, friendlier shade of gold. He introduced himself as an old friend of the family, a high-ranking member of the Pack Council. "I wanted to apologize for Kaylin's abruptness," Julian said, his voice smooth as honey. "He's under a great deal of pressure. The Alpha carries a heavy burden." He offered her the books. "I thought you might be bored. These are some histories of our people. They might help you understand." Julian became her only real point of contact. He would visit her, talk to her, explain the pack dynamics. He made her feel seen, human. He painted Kaylin as a tragic, tormented figure, a leader forced into difficult choices for the good of his people. But it was Kaylin who she truly wanted answers from. The Alpha himself remained a phantom. She would catch glimpses of him, a flash of black hair in a corridor, the powerful line of his shoulders as he stood staring into the fire. He never spoke to her, but she felt his eyes on her constantly, a heavy, possessive gaze that made her skin prickle. Finally, after nearly a week of this torturous silence, she confronted him. She found him in a large, book-lined study, staring out a window at the dark, rain-lashed forest. "Why am I here?" she demanded, her voice shaking but firm. "You can't just steal a person's life and offer no explanation. What is this fate you were talking about?" He turned slowly. In the dim light of the study, his face was a mask of shadows and harsh lines. The cold control was gone, replaced by a weary exhaustion that seemed to carve itself into his features. "You deserve an explanation," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It is not a story I enjoy telling." He gestured for her to sit in a worn leather armchair by the fire. He remained standing, a restless predator pacing before the flames. "My family, the black lineage, is cursed," he began, the words sounding like they were torn from him. "For generations, the Alpha of this pack has been afflicted. We call it the Black Moon Curse. On the nights of the full moon, we've a change, not into the wolf form our people command, but into something else, something mindless, a beast of pure rage and destruction." Alara's blood ran cold. She thought of the monstrous battle in the woods. "A Kwaitu," she whispered, a word from the old legends. Kaylin's jaw tightened. "Yes, a monster that cannot tell friend from foe. It lives only to kill. My father, and his father before him, destroyed everything they touched during those nights. They were locked away. But sometimes, the rage was too strong. Our own people have been lost to this curse." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a torment so profound it was like looking into a wound. "It is my inheritance." "But what does this have to in with me?" Alara asked, her voice trembling. "There is a prophecy," he continued, his gaze intense. "A way to soothe the beast. A way, perhaps, to break the curse entirely. The prophecy speaks of a Tianming, a fated soulmate, whose spirit is pure enough to quiet the black moon's rage, a soul born of werewolves, but without the wolf spirit, a null." The word hit her like a physical blow. A null, the source of her lifelong shame, the mark of her otherness, was somehow the key to his salvation. "Me," she breathed, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. "You brought me here to be some kind of supernatural tranquilizer." The crudeness of her words made him flinch. "I brought you here because you are the only hope this pack has," he bit out, his voice sharp with a frustration that bordered on despair. "The full moon is in 2 nights. Without you, I will become that thing, and I will destroy everything around me until my pack is forced to put me down. So yes," he finished, his voice raw with a pain he could no longer conceal, "you are here to be my cure, because I have no other choice." He stood there, the great, powerful Alpha Kalen Black, looking at her with a desperate, pleading agony in his golden eyes, and Alara saw past the cold arrogance, past the kidnapper and the captor. She saw a man chained to a monstrous destiny, a man living in constant fear of the monster within. She was his prisoner, she was his cure, and she was utterly, terrifyingly trapped. The 2 days leading up to the full moon were thick with a palpable, suffocating tension. A heavy quiet had fallen over the entire Black Forest settlement, as if the very air was holding its breath. Alara saw fear in the eyes of the pack members who hurried past her, their gazes averted. They weren't looking at her with their usual suspicion anymore, but with a desperate, fragile hope that felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. Kalen was nowhere to be seen. Julian told her that he was in seclusion, preparing for the ordeal. But Alara knew he was just hiding, isolating himself from the people he was terrified he might harm. The knowledge settled in her stomach like a cold stone. On the evening of the full moon, Lyra came to her room. Her face was pale, her usually bright eyes wide with anxiety. "It's time," she said softly. "They're taking him to the dungeons now." Dungeons. The word sent a shiver of medieval dread down Alara's spine. Lyra led her not out of the lodge, but down a stone staircase Alara hadn't noticed before, which spiraled deep into the earth beneath the foundation. The air grew cold and damp, smelling of wet rock and old iron. They emerged into a cavernous, torch-lit space. The dungeon was hewn from living rock, its walls thick and unforgiving. At its center was a massive cell, its bars forged from thick, dark metal that gleamed in the flickering light. Inside the cell, Kalen stood with his back to them, his shoulders rigid. He wasn't chained, he was simply waiting. The sight of him, so powerful and yet so vulnerable, a king waiting for his own monstrous transformation, made Alara's heart ache with a strange, unwilling empathy. "I have to go now," Lyra whispered, her hand clutching Alara's arm. "They don't let us stay. It's too dangerous. Just please be careful. Alara." She gave Alara one last frightened look before retreating back up the stairs, leaving her alone in the cavern with the condemned Alpha. The heavy stone door boomed shut, and they were plunged into a profound silence, broken only by the crackle of the torches. Alara stood several feet from the cell, her arms wrapped around herself, watching him. He hadn't moved. He hadn't acknowledged her presence. High above, through a small grate in the ceiling, she could see a sliver of the night sky. A brilliant white moon was climbing, its light pure and merciless. As the moonlight touched the grate, A guttural groan was torn from Kalen's throat. He staggered, his hands flying to his head as if to hold his skull together. His body began to convulse. It started with a tremor, then grew into violent, bone-jarring spasms. Alara watched in frozen horror as his perfect, human form began to break apart. His bones cracked and reset with sickening crunches, his spine arched, his muscles bunching and twisting into new, unnatural shapes. He screamed, a sound of pure, undiluted agony that echoed off the stone walls, a sound of a man being ripped apart from the inside out. Dark, coarse fur sprouted from his skin, his features elongated, his mouth stretching into a terrible, fanged maw. He grew, his body swelling with a horrifying, dark power until he was no longer a man. He was a beast, a Kwaithu. He was larger than the wolves she had seen in the forest, his body a twisted mockery of their noble forms. His fur was a chaotic, matted black, and his eyes burned with a malevolent, blood-red light. He was the very embodiment of mindless rage. The beast threw back its head and let out a roar that was a tempest of hate and pain. It slammed its colossal body against the bars of the cell, making the entire structure groan in protest. It clawed at the stone floor, its talons striking sparks. It was a hurricane of fury, desperate to get out, to kill, to destroy. Alara was paralyzed by a terror so complete it felt like a physical death. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to claw her way back up the stairs. This thing was not Kalen. This was a demon wearing his skin. But she didn't run. Something held her there. Perhaps it was Lyra's pleading face. Perhaps it was the memory of the agony in Kalen's eyes. Or perhaps it was a deeper instinct, something she didn't know she possessed. The beast was a maelstrom of violence. It raged, it howled, it thrashed against its prison. It wanted her blood. She could feel the murderous intent rolling off it in waves, a palpable heat. And then she started to sing. She didn't know where the song came from. It wasn't a melody she had ever heard or a song she had ever learned. The words were ancient, forgotten, yet they rose to her lips as if she had known them her entire life. Her voice was small and wavering at first, a tiny flicker of light in a vast and violent darkness. But it was there. The song was a lullaby. It spoke of silver light, of quiet streams, of a peace that follows a long and weary battle. It was a song of soothing, of homecoming. The beast stilled. Its frenzied assault on the bars paused. Its massive, monstrous head cocked to one side, its red eyes fixing on her. A low, confused growl rumbled in its chest. Alara's voice grew stronger, clearer, filling the cavernous space. The fear was still there, a cold current beneath the surface, but the song was a current of its own, pulling her along. She took a hesitant step closer to the cell. The beast watched her, its panting breaths coming in harsh, ragged gasps. The pure, mindless rage in its eyes began to recede, like a tide pulling away from the shore. It was still a monster, still terrifying, but something was changing. A flicker of confusion, of awareness, was dawning in those hellish red depths. She reached the bars, her small, trembling hand resting on the cold metal. The beast was inches away on the other side, its heat a palpable force. It could have lunged, could have snapped its jaws and torn her arm from its socket through the bars. But it didn't move. She continued to sing, her eyes locked with its. The blood red of its gaze began to soften, swirling with flecks of gold. It was a battle of colors, of natures, of curse and cure, and her song, her presence, was tipping the scales. With a deep, shuddering sigh, the beast sank to the stone floor. It lay its great head on its paws, the motion one of utter exhaustion. The burning red of its eyes finally faded completely, replaced by a soft, familiar, molten gold. They were Kalen's eyes again, filled not with rage, but with a weary, profound gratitude. And then he slept. Alara's song trailed off into silence. The only sound was the deep, even breathing of the sleeping monster. For the first time in generations, the alpha of the Black Forest pack had survived a full moon without destruction. She sank to the floor, her back against the cold bars, her body trembling with the aftermath of terror and a strange, powerful, new emotion. She had faced the beast, and in its place, she had found the man. The realization was as terrifying and as binding as any cage. In the aftermath of the full moon, something in the Black Forest territory shifted. The suffocating fear that had permeated the air was replaced by a tentative, almost fragile sense of relief. When Alara emerged from the dungeons in the pale light of morning, she found the pack members no longer looked at her with suspicion, but with a new, startling reverence. Whispers followed her. They called her the Moon Singer, the Calm Bringer. The attention was a different kind of invisible wall. Before, she was dismissed. Now, she was an object of awe, a precious artifact to be handled with care. She was still not Alara. She was still not one of them. She was a tool, a very effective and revered tool, but a tool nonetheless. Kalen remained distant. After he reverted to his human form, he retreated once more into his study, barricading himself behind a wall of cold silence. But the way he looked at her had changed. The harsh demand was gone, replaced by something far more complex, a mixture of gratitude, wonder, and a deep, unsettling caution. It was as if he was afraid to get too close, terrified of what he might break. Feeling adrift in this strange new world, Alara turned to the only thing that had ever truly been hers, her art. She asked Lyra for her art supplies, and soon, her small room was transformed into a makeshift studio. She sketched the ancient trees, the stony faces of the pack elders, the feral grace of the wolves she sometimes saw patrolling the perimeter. Her art was her language, her way of processing the impossible reality she now inhabited. One afternoon, as she worked on a charcoal drawing of the Great Lodge, her mind drifted. She began to sketch from a memory that wasn't quite hers. Two figures, a man and a woman, their faces indistinct but their forms radiating warmth and love. They were laughing, their features imbued with a wild, joyful freedom. Behind them, a much smaller, childish figure stood watching her. A sudden, dizzying wave of images flooded her mind. The scent of pine and wild roses, the feel of a large, calloused hand holding her own, the sound of a woman's voice, singing the very same ancient lullaby she had sung to Kalen in the dungeon. "Are you all right, Alara?" Alara gasped, the charcoal stick snapping in her fingers. Julian Volt stood in her doorway, his handsome face etched with concern. She hadn't even heard him approach. I'm fine," she stammered, quickly closing her sketchbook. The images felt too personal, too raw to share. "You seem a long way away," he said, his smile gentle. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning her drawings scattered across the floor. "You have a remarkable talent. You capture the spirit of this place." His compliments were a balm on her raw nerves, unlike Kalen, who observed her with a heavy, unreadable silence. Julian offered words of kindness and admiration. He made her feel like a person, not a prophecy. "Kalen should appreciate you more," Julian said, his voice lowering into a conspiratorial tone. "He is so consumed by his duty, by the curse. He sees you as a solution, a key. But you are so much more than that, Alara." He began to visit her more often, always with a kind word or a thoughtful gift, a rare book of local legends, a box of fine sketching pencils. He told her stories about the pack, about his childhood with Kalen. He painted a picture of a Kalen who was always distant, always burdened by his destiny as alpha, even as a boy. "He's never known how to connect with people," Julian explained one evening. "He only knows command. It is his nature. But you need gentleness, understanding." Julian's words planted seeds of doubt in her mind. Was Kaylin truly incapable of seeing her as anything more than a means to an end? The thought was a painful thorn in her heart. He protected her. She knew that. He had silently ordered the pack to treat her with respect. She felt his presence, a constant, watchful guardian at the edge of her awareness. But he never spoke, never reached out, never offered a single word of personal gratitude for what she had done. The distance between them was a chasm, and Julian was diligently building a bridge for her, a bridge that led away from Kaylin and towards him. She found herself relying on Julian's easy companionship, his compliments, his seeming understanding of her plight. He was her only friend in this wild and alien kingdom, and she was too lost, too lonely, to question his motives. She was too desperate to believe that someone, at last, truly saw her. A week after the full moon, the Black Forest Territory decided to celebrate. It was an ancient tradition, a grand ball held on the night of the new moon to give thanks for their survival and to honor the bonds of the pack. This year, Lyra told Alara, the celebration was for her. The idea filled Alara with a cold dread. Being the center of attention was her deepest fear. She tried to refuse, but Lyra was insistent, her eyes shining with excitement. "You have to come. It's for you. Julian has already commissioned a dress." The dress was a peace offering and a cage all in one. It arrived in a long, flat box, and when Alara opened it, she gasped. It was the color of a twilight sky, a deep, dusky blue, made of a fabric that shimmered like moonlight on water. It was elegant and simple, and so painfully beautiful that it made her want to cry. Wearing it felt like putting on a costume, pretending to be someone she wasn't, someone graceful, important, and deserving of such a thing. On the night of the ball, Lyra helped her with her hair, weaving it into a soft, intricate braid. When Alara looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The severe, frightened girl was gone, replaced by a stranger with wide, shadowed eyes and a dusting of color on her cheeks. She looked almost beautiful. The thought was so foreign it was jarring. The great hall of the lodge had been transformed. Garlands of evergreen and white winter roses were draped from the rafters, and hundreds of candles cast a warm, golden glow over the room. A string quartet played a haunting, melodic tune in a corner. The entire pack was there, dressed in their finest, their amber eyes glittering in the candlelight. When Alara entered at Lyra's side, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to her. It was the stuff of her nightmares. Yet something was different. The stares weren't hostile or mocking. They were filled with respect, with awe, for the first time. She walked through this hall and felt not like an interloper, but like an honored guest. Julian was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs. He looked devastatingly handsome in a formal black suit, his charming smile flashing. "Alara," he breathed, taking her hand and pressing a light kiss to her knuckles. "You are more beautiful than the moonlight itself." He led her into the throng of people, introducing her to pack elders, his arm possessively at her waist. He was her guide, her protector, making her feel at ease in the swirling crowd. She saw Kaylin across the room, leaning against a stone pillar, a stark and formidable figure in the midst of the celebration. He watched her, his face an unreadable mask, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made the air around her crackle. He didn't approach. He just watched. After a time, Julian led her onto the dance floor. "May I have this dance?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. Alara was a clumsy dancer, but Julian was effortlessly graceful, guiding her through the steps of a slow, stately waltz. He held her close, his hand warm on her back. "You see," he murmured into her ear, his breath warm against her skin, "you belong here. You are one of us now, not just a cure, but our Luna." And then, in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by the entire pack, he stopped. He turned to face her, his hands holding both of hers, His charming smile was gone, replaced by a look of profound, serious adoration. "Elara Swan," he said, his voice ringing through the suddenly silent hall. "You came to us like a prayer answered. You have saved us. You have saved me. I believe our meeting was fated, as much as any prophecy." He went down on one knee. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "Be my mate, Elara," he declared, his golden eyes pleading. "Stand by my side. Let me be the one to honor you, to protect you, not as an alpha protecting a tool, but as a man who loves you." The world tilted on its axis. Elara stared down at him, her mind a blank, roaring void. This wasn't happening. It was a dream, a performance, a nightmare. The entire pack was watching, their faces alight with shock and anticipation. Before she could form a single word, a growl, low and vicious and utterly inhuman, tore through the hall. It was a sound of pure, possessive fury. Kalen was moving. He crossed the room in 3 long, predatory strides, his grace abandoned for raw, terrifying purpose. He reached them, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He seized Julian by the front of his suit and hauled him to his feet with brutal, effortless strength. "She is mine," Kalen snarled, the words a guttural proclamation. Julian stumbled back, a flicker of fear, or was it triumph in his eyes? Kalen didn't even look at him. His blazing golden eyes were fixed on Elara. He stepped into the space Julian had vacated, his powerful body caging her in. He was radiating a heat that was almost scalding, an aura of territorial dominance so potent it made her knees weak. "You," he said, his voice a low, rumbling command that resonated in her very bones. He took her hand, his grip firm and unyielding. "You are the Tian Ming of this pack. You belong to the Alpha." Then, raising his voice so that every soul in the hall could hear, he made his own declaration, a stark and brutal counter to Julian's flowery proposal. "Elara Swan is my fated mate," Kalen announced, his voice like the crack of a whip. "She will be my Luna. She is my future betrothed. Anyone who thinks otherwise will answer to me." He pulled her against him, his arm a band of steel around her waist, and stared out at his pack with a defiant, possessive glare. Elara stood frozen in his embrace, her heart hammering against his chest. She was trapped between 2 declarations, claimed like a piece of property in a public spectacle. She wasn't an honored guest. She wasn't a lover. She was a prize. And in that moment, seeing the shocked and triumphant look on Julian's face and the cold, proprietary fire in Kalen's eyes, she felt more invisible than ever before. The aftermath of the dual proposals was a chaotic blur. The music had stopped. The celebratory atmosphere had shattered, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. Kalen didn't release her. He held her pinned to his side and guided her, with unyielding force, out of the great hall, away from the hundreds of watching eyes. He didn't stop until they were outside, on a stone veranda that overlooked the dark, whispering expanse of the forest. The cold night air was a shock to Elara's skin, but it did little to cool the fire of humiliation and anger burning inside her. She wrenched herself from his grasp, stumbling back. "How dare you?" she choked out, her voice trembling with a rage she had never known she possessed. "How dare you do that?" Kalen stood before her, the moonlight catching the harsh planes of his face. The possessive fury was still simmering in his eyes, but now it was mingled with a sliver of confusion, as if her anger was something he could not compute. "He overstepped his bounds," Kalen stated, as if that explained everything. "You belong to me, to the Alpha." "I don't belong to anyone," Elara shot back, her voice rising. "I am not a piece of property to be claimed not by him and not by you. That whole display, it was disgusting. You humiliated me. I was protecting you, protecting my claim." "Your claim," she cried, laughing a bitter. humorless laugh. "You think you have a claim on me because a prophecy says so. You brought me here against my will. You keep me here like a prisoner, and you barely speak a word to me unless you're barking an order. The only thing you want from me is a cure for your little monster problem." She jabbed a finger at his chest, her whole body shaking. "That is all I am to you, a dose of medicine you take once a month." The words hit him harder than a physical blow. The anger in his eyes vanished, extinguished, replaced by a raw, profound hurt. He looked, for the first time, utterly defenseless. The alpha, the king of this dark forest, looked like a man who had just been gutted. "Is that what you think?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was hoarse with an emotion she couldn't name. "It's what you've shown me," she retorted, though her anger was starting to falter in the face of his sudden, shocking vulnerability. He took a step closer, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. "From the first moment I saw you," he said, his voice low and intense. "In the woods, I knew." The beast inside me went silent, not in rage, but in awe. I have spent my entire life fighting that thing, Ilara, hating it, and when I saw you, for the first time, it was at peace. You were a miracle." He shook his head, a look of self-loathing twisting his perfect features. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice raw. "Julian is right. I only know command. I only know how to take what I need to protect my pack. My father taught me that to be alpha is to be stone, to show no weakness, to feel nothing but duty." He looked up, and his golden eyes, under the starlight, were glistening. At first, yes, it was about the cure. You were the key to my survival, to the pack's survival. It was my duty to secure you. But then, I watched you. I watched you draw. I watched the way you look at the rain. I listened to you breathe at night from down the hall, because it's the only sound that lets me sleep without nightmares. Being near you. It doesn't just silence the beast, Ilara. It silences the noise in my own head. It brings a peace I have never, in my entire life, known. Her anger dissolved, washed away by the tide of his confession. This was more than she had ever expected, more than she had ever dared to hope for. "I am hard," he continued, his voice breaking, "and I am cold, and I am sorry. It's the only way I know how to be. I surround myself with ice because I am terrified that the monster inside me will burn everyone I touch. I stay away from you because I am more afraid of hurting you than I am of the full moon itself." He finally looked at her, his soul seemingly laid bare in his golden gaze. The emotion in them was so powerful, so achingly real, it stole her breath. "You are not a dose of medicine," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "You are the light, the only light in a very dark world." They stood in the heavy silence, the stars glittering like cold diamonds in the sky above. His confession hung between them, a fragile, shimmering thing. Ilara's heart ached with the weight of it, with the tragedy of him. He was a man so broken by his curse, so defined by his duty, that he didn't know how to love. He only knew how to possess, how to claim. She wanted to reach out, to touch his face, to offer some kind of comfort, but she couldn't. The public humiliation was still a raw wound. His confession was beautiful, but it didn't change what he had done. It didn't change the fact that he saw her as a destiny to be fulfilled, not a woman to be won. Without another word, Ilara turned and walked back into the lodge, leaving Kaelin standing alone under the cold, silent stars. The chasm between them was no longer empty. It was now filled with his painful, beautiful, and impossible words, and Ilara had no idea how to cross it. In the days following the disastrous new moon ball, a fragile, unspoken truce settled between Ilara and Kaelin. His confession had changed everything, and nothing at all. He no longer treated her with cold indifference. Instead, he watched her with a guarded, yearning sorrow that was almost more painful to bear. He would leave small gifts for her outside her door, a perfect, unopened pine cone, a rare white feather, a wildflower he must have found on the very edge of their territory. They were silent, desperate apologies she didn't know how to accept. The pack, meanwhile, had taken his declaration as law. They now treated her with the deference due their future Luna. The reverence was suffocating. She was a queen in a kingdom she hadn't chosen, betrothed to a king she didn't know how to love. Julian was her only escape. He was contrite, apologetic for the scene he had caused. "I was a fool," he told her, his handsome face a picture of remorse. "My feelings for you, they made me reckless. I should never have put you in that position. Can you forgive me?" She had. How could she not? He was her friend, the only one who seemed to understand her turmoil. He listened as she confided in him her confusion about Kaylin, her feelings of being trapped by a destiny she didn't ask for. "Kaylin sees the world in black and white. Ilara," Julian said, his voice full of sympathy. "He sees prophecy, and he sees his duty. He doesn't see you, the woman who longs for answers about her own past, her own family." This struck a chord deep within her. The flashes of memory had been growing more frequent, more vivid. She dreamed of her parents' faces, of their smiles. She remembered the lullaby. There was a story there, her story, and it was lost. "I need to know who they were," she whispered to Julian one afternoon. "I need to know why they left me with my aunt, why I grew up feeling so incomplete." Julian's expression grew serious. He took her hands in his. "What if I told you I could help you find those answers?" he said, his voice low. "There is a place, an old place, deep in the woods, an ancient shrine of our people. The memories of the bloodline are strong there. If what I suspect about you is true, that place might awaken something in you. It might show you the truth." Hope, bright and dizzying, flooded her. "Can you take me there?" He hesitated, a look of conflict on his face. "It's forbidden territory. Kaylin would never allow it. He wants to keep you here, safe, controlled. He is afraid of what you might learn, of the power you might possess." His words painted Kaylin as a possessive jailer, afraid of her finding her own strength. The image stung. "He doesn't own me," Ilara said, her resolve hardening. "When can we go?" "Tonight," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. "While the pack sleeps, I will come for you." That night, Ilara paced her room, her heart a frantic drum of anticipation and guilt. She was betraying Kaylin's trust, the fragile peace they had built. But this was about more than Kaylin. This was about her, for the first time. She was making a choice for herself. Julian arrived as promised, a shadow in the darkness. He led her silently out of the lodge and into the moonless forest. The woods at night were a different entity, a place of secrets and hidden dangers. But with Julian at her side, she felt safe. He led her on a winding path for what felt like hours, deeper into the forest than she had ever been. Finally, they arrived in a clearing dominated by a circle of ancient standing stones, overgrown with moss and ivy. In the center of the circle was a stone altar, carved with swirling, ancient symbols. "This is it," Julian whispered, "the Shrine of Echoes." Ilara stepped into the circle, a strange energy prickling her skin. The air here was heavy, humming with a power she could feel in her bones. She walked towards the altar, her hand hovering over its cool, carved surface. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Just touch it," Julian said from behind her. "Let it connect with your blood, with the memories you hold inside." She took a deep breath and placed her palm flat on the stone altar. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a blinding white light exploded behind her eyes. Images, sharp and clear as glass, flooded her mind. She saw her parents, young and beautiful and fiercely in love. She saw them in their wolf forms, playing with her as a child in a sun-dappled field. She saw their faces contorted in fear, trying to hide her, to protect her. And then she saw the final, horrific image. She saw them fighting, dying, at the hands of another wolf, a wolf with clever, ambitious, pale golden eyes. A wolf she recognized. "Julian," she breathed, snatching her hand back from the altar as if it were burning. She stumbled backward, turning to face him. The truth was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. He was no longer smiling. The charming, gentle mask had fallen away, revealing something cold, ancient, and utterly malevolent underneath. The soft gold of his eyes had hardened into the merciless glare of a predator. "You see it now, don't you?" he said, his voice a silky, triumphant purr. "They were fools. They discovered my plan, the one I forged with Kalen's weak-willed father, the curse, the black moon. We didn't find it. We created it." Alara stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. Created it, why? "Power," he hissed, his face alight with a dark, fanatical glee. "A way to control the alpha bloodline, to bend it to my will, to eventually take it for myself. Your parents were going to expose us. I couldn't let that happen. It was a pity. They were strong." Her world crumbled. The man she had trusted, her only friend, was the monster who had murdered her family. "And you," he continued, taking a slow, deliberate step towards her. "You are the final, beautiful piece of the puzzle. They didn't know what you were. They just knew you were special. You're no null, my dear Alara. You are a lunapure, the last of a sacred, ancient bloodline whose very presence can amplify or sever any power, any curse. You weren't born to be a simple cure. You were born to be a crown." He smiled, a chilling, terrifying smile. "Kalen thinks he can use you to break his pathetic little curse. I have a grander vision. With your power, fused with mine, I will not just rule this pack. I will rule them all. I will become a god." He lunged for her, but before he could touch her, a roar of pure, apocalyptic fury ripped through the night. A black tempest of fur and fang exploded from the trees, moving faster than the eye could follow. Kalen had come for her. Kalen in his wolf form was a terrifying, beautiful spectacle of raw power. He was a living shadow, a blur of motion and muscle, his golden eyes blazing with righteous fury. He slammed into Julian, who had transformed in the blink of an eye into his own wolf form, a sleek, pale gold predator, cunning and cruel. The two alphas crashed together with the force of a thunderclap. The clearing became a battlefield. They were a whirlwind of claws and teeth, their snarls and growls echoing off the ancient stones. It was a brutal, primal dance of dominance and hate. Kalen was larger, stronger, fueled by a desperation and rage that made him a force of nature, but Julian was faster, more agile, fighting with the cold, precise cruelty of a master assassin. Alara was frozen, trapped in the eye of the storm. Julian's monstrous confession rang in her ears, a litany of betrayal and death. He killed them. He killed them. The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. She saw the link now, the psychic connection Kalen had to her, the bond of the Tianming that had warned him she was in danger. He had followed them. He had come to save her. Kalen gained an advantage, his powerful jaws closing around Julian's leg. Julian yelped, a sound of pained fury, and twisted, raking his claws across Kalen's flank. Kalen roared, stumbling back, blood welling from a series of deep gashes. He was wounded, but his attack had bought her a precious second. "Alara, run!" Kalen's voice, though distorted by his wolf form, was a clear command in her mind, a frantic, telepathic plea. But her feet were rooted to the spot. Run where the forest was Julian's kingdom as much as Kalen's. There was no escape, and she couldn't leave Kaelin. She couldn't watch him die for her. Julian saw his opportunity. With Kaelin momentarily staggered, he ignored him, turning his predatory attention back to Alara. His goal wasn't to win the fight. It was to claim his prize. He lunged towards her, his jaws open, aiming not to kill, but to capture. Suddenly, from the shadows of the shrine, something glittered. Julian, in his human form, had anticipated this battle. As he changed, an object had fallen from his jacket, and Alara's eyes now fixed upon it. It was a dagger, its blade glowing with the pale, sickly luminescence of forged silver, a weapon anathema to their kind. Before Kaelin could recover, before Julian could reach her, Alara moved. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a choice. It was a pure, absolute instinct, a reaction born of love and a desperate need to protect. She dove forward, not away from the danger, but into it. She snatched the silver dagger from the ground just as Julian's wolf form was upon her. She didn't have the strength to fight him, no skill with a blade. She only had one option. Julian, seeing Kaelin charging at him again from the corner of his eye, shifted his attack. He veered. His new target, the recovering Alpha, the silver dagger, now the greater threat. With a final, triumphant snarl, he launched himself through the air, aiming for Kaelin's exposed, wounded side. Without a second of hesitation, Alara threw herself in the way. She put herself directly between the two alphas, between the charging predator and the man who had, against all odds, captured her heart. The impact was brutal. Julian's massive form slammed into her, his momentum carrying them both to the ground, but it wasn't his weight that she felt. It was a sharp, searing, unimaginable pain in her side. In her desperate, clumsy act of defense, she had turned the silver dagger on herself. It had been clutched in her hand, and the force of Julian's attack had driven it deep into her own body. A scream tore from her throat, raw and agonizing. Kaelin saw. His roar of fury turned into a howl of pure, soul-shattering anguish. The sound was the breaking of a heart, the death of a world. The pain was a white-hot fire. But then something else happened. The wound, the silver. It didn't just hurt her. It unlocked her. It was a key turning in a lock that had been sealed since her birth. A light, brilliant and pure as the moon itself, erupted from her. It was a silent, silver explosion, a wave of immense, untamed power that pulsed out from her body. It was not a violent force, but it was absolute. The light washed over Julian. He howled, a shriek of agony, as the pure energy seared him. It wasn't killing him, but it was unmaking the darkness within him, tearing at the roots of his ambition. He was thrown backward, his body slamming against one of the standing stones before he scrambled away, wounded and broken, disappearing into the darkness of the forest like the coward he was. The light then swept over Kaelin. It enveloped him in a gentle, silver embrace. Alara, through the haze of her pain, saw the tense lines of his wolf form relax. A dark, shadowy mist seemed to lift from his body, dissolving into the night air, the ancient, foul magic of the Black Moon curse. The darkness that Julian had woven into his bloodline was being unwritten. It was being cleansed. Then the light faded, retracting back into its source. The world rushed back in the smell of blood and damp earth, the sound of Kaelin's frantic whimpering. Alara lay on the forest floor, the silver dagger still embedded in her side, her lifeblood staining the ancient moss. Kaelin, now in his human form, was at her side in an instant, his face a mask of terror and disbelief. "Alara," he choked out, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her, afraid to hurt her more. Tears, hot and real, streamed down his face, dropping onto hers. "You're free," she whispered, her voice a faint, reedy thing. A small, pained smile touched her lips. "The curse, it's gone." "I don't care about the curse," he sobbed, his voice cracking with a despair that was terrifying to behold. "I only care about you. Alara, please don't leave me, please." She reached up, her trembling fingers touching his cheek. The world was growing dim, the edges of her vision fading to black. She could feel her life slipping away, a handful of sand running through her fingers. Her last sensation was of Kaelin gathering her into his arms, his desperate, broken plea echoing in the silent, sacred clearing. Alara woke to the soft glow of candlelight and the scent of healing herbs. For a confusing moment, she thought she was in a dream. The pain was gone, replaced by a dull, persistent ache in her side. She was lying in a large, comfortable bed with soft furs piled high, not in her small room, but in what was clearly the Alpha's master chamber. A fire crackled in a stone hearth nearby, and in a chair beside the bed, Kaelin sat, his head bowed, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't been sleeping. From the dark circles under his eyes and the stubble on his jaw, it was clear he hadn't slept in days. He was just watching over her. "Kaelin," she whispered, her voice scratchy. His head snapped up. The relief that washed over his face was so profound, so absolute. It was as if the sun had just risen in the room. In an instant, he was on his knees beside the bed, his hand gently taking hers. His touch was warm and real. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're awake. The pack healer said. She said the silver should have killed you, but your own power. It fought the poison. It saved you." "My power?" she asked, her mind still fuzzy. "The Luna pure," he confirmed, his golden eyes shining with a reverence that made her blush. "The light that healed me, that drove Julian away. That was you, your true nature, awakened by the silver." It all came rushing back the shrine. Julian's betrayal, the fight, the searing pain of the dagger, the sacrifice, and Kaelin's face streaked with tears, his raw cry of despair. "You're okay," she said, her first thought not for herself, but for him. "The curse, it's truly gone." He nodded, a slow, wondrous movement. "I can feel it. The beast is still a part of me, the wolf. The alpha, but the rage, the madness of the black moon. It has been silenced forever. You freed me. Alara, you sacrificed yourself to set me free." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that was full of gratitude and a love so intense it was humbling. Over the next few days, as Alara recovered, she began to understand the true extent of what had happened. She was no longer a null, a glitch in the bloodline. She was the opposite, a Luna pure, a being of immense healing and balancing power. She was no longer invisible. When she was finally strong enough to walk the halls of the lodge, the pack members didn't just revere her as a prophecy fulfilled. They looked at her with genuine affection, with fierce loyalty. She was not just their alpha's fated mate. She had bled for them, had saved their leader. She was their Luna, their queen. The change in Kaelin was the most profound of all. With the weight of the curse lifted, the perpetual storm in his eyes had cleared. The cold, hard shell he had built around himself for protection had cracked and fallen away, revealing the warm, deeply feeling man beneath. He smiled now, a real, breathtaking smile that transformed his entire face. He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that made her heart flutter. He was still an alpha, still possessed of an ancient authority and immense power, but he was no longer a man at war with himself. He was whole, and he was devoted, utterly and completely, to her. He no longer stood at a distance. He was a constant, gentle presence. He would bring her meals himself. He would sit with her for hours, simply holding her hand, telling her stories of the pack, of his childhood, asking about her own fragmented memories. They talked, really talked, for the first time. He learned of her love for painting, and he transformed a room with the best morning light into a beautiful studio for her. She learned of his secret love for astronomy, and they spent hours on the veranda, him pointing out constellations in the clear night sky. They fell in love not in a single, dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small, quiet ones, in the way he would gently tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, in the way her laughter would ease the last remaining shadows from his eyes. He learned to be gentle, to ask instead of command, and she learned to be brave, to accept love, to finally, truly be seen. Her bond with him was no longer just a prophecy. It was a choice, a connection forged in terror and sacrifice, and tempered in peace and understanding. She was not just his mate, she was his partner. He listened to her counsel in pack matters, her innate empathy and intuition providing a balance to his alpha strength. They were two halves of a whole, Alpha and Luna, darkness and light, intertwined and stronger together than they had ever been apart. The invisible girl from the Forks coffee shop was gone forever. In her place was a woman who knew her own power, her own worth, and her own heart. She was Alara Swan, Luna of the Black Forest Pack, and she was, at last, home. They chose to be married 2 months later, on the night of the first full moon since the curse had been broken. It was a bold, symbolic choice. What was once a night of terror and hiding was to become a night of celebration and union, a final, definitive declaration of their victory over the darkness of the past. The entire territory buzzed with joyful preparation. The grand hall of the lodge was transformed once again, but not for a tense, formal ball. This time, it was filled with warmth and light. The ceiling was a canopy of intertwined branches, glittering with hundreds of tiny, suspended crystals that looked like captive stars. The air smelled of pine, winter roses, and beeswax candles. Alara's dress was not a gift from a manipulative suitor, but a creation of the pack itself. The elder women had woven it from the finest spun linen, as white as fresh snow. Lyra and the younger girls had embroidered the hem and sleeves with delicate, silver thread in patterns of swirling moons and ancient pack symbols. It was a garment made of love and loyalty. When she was ready, she didn't look like a stranger in a mirror. She looked like herself, but whole, and filled with a quiet, radiant happiness that seemed to glow from within. Lyra, her eyes shining with tears, walked her to the great hall. The pack was assembled, not as a silent, intimidating crowd, but as a vast, smiling family. They stood on either side of a path strewn with white rose petals, which led to the great hearth. And there, standing before the roaring fire, Kaelin was waiting for her. He was not the cold, intimidating alpha who had taken her from the coffee shop. He was dressed in a simple, formal black tunic that emphasized the powerful lines of his body, but his face was open, unguarded, and filled with an expression of such pure, unadulterated love that it made her breath catch in her throat. His golden eyes tracked her every step, and in them, she saw her past, her present, and her entire future. He took her hands as she reached him, his strong, warm fingers lacing with hers. The pack elder began the ancient ceremony, his voice a low, resonant chant, speaking of the bonds of the wolf, the sanctity of the mate bond, and the fated dance of the moon and the shadows. But Kaelin and Alara only had eyes for each other when it was time for their vows. Kaelin turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "Alara," he began, his voice low and steady, yet thrumming with emotion that filled the silent hall. "I lived my life in shadow, chained to a destiny of darkness and pain. I thought strength was a fortress of ice, and that my duty was to stand alone then you came. You walked into my life and did not just face the beast, you calmed the man. You showed me that true strength is not in solitude, but in union. It is not in being made of stone, but in having the courage to feel." He gently squeezed her hands. "The prophecy called you my fate, But you are so much more than that. You are my choice. You are my anchor, my hope, and my home. You were never just a light to guide me out of the darkness," he said. His voice dropping to an intimate whisper meant only for her, but heard by all. "You are my moon, and I will be the shadow that surrounds and protects that moon for every night of the rest of my life." Tears of pure happiness welled in Alara's eyes. She smiled, a radiant, beautiful smile that held all the love in her heart. "Kaylin," she replied, her own voice soft but clear. "I spent my life feeling like a ghost, a mistake, a piece that didn't fit. You saw me when no one else did, even when I couldn't see myself. You brought me into a world of magic and monsters, but you are the one who showed me the magic within myself. You taught me that my perceived weakness was my greatest strength. I came to your kingdom as a prisoner." She paused, her eyes locking with his. "And I choose to stay as its queen. I choose you now and always." The elder pronounced them Alpha and Luna, and Kaylin drew her into a kiss that was both a tender promise and a passionate claim. It was a seal on their past, a celebration of their present, and a vow for their forever. The hall erupted in a joyous uproar of howls and cheers, the sound a symphony of celebration that echoed out into the moonlit forest. They were a pack, a family, made whole again, led by a love that had literally conquered a curse. 1 year later, Alara stood on the stone veranda of the lodge, leaning back against Kaylin's strong, warm chest. His arms were wrapped securely around her, his hand resting possessively, tenderly, on the gentle swell of her belly. Below them, the Black Forest territory was bathed in the gentle, silver light of a benevolent moon. Life had settled into a rhythm of peaceful, joyful purpose. The threat of Julian Volt was gone, stripped of much of his dark power. He had become a pariah, a lone wolf whose name was now a cautionary tale whispered to pups. Forks had changed, too. Under Alara's gentle influence and Kaylin's new, enlightened leadership, the old walls of secrecy between the pack and the human town were slowly, carefully beginning to crumble. An understanding was being forged, a bridge being built between two worlds. Alara had even started teaching an art class for the children in town, human and werewolf alike. The whispers about her being a null, about the shame of being barren, had long since died, replaced by the reality of the new life she now carried. The pack's healers had explained that her Luna pure essence had simply been dormant. Her sacrifice at the shrine had not only awakened her power, but her very biology, preparing her body to carry the next generation of their lineage, a child who would be the first in centuries to be born free of the Black Moon's shadow. Kaylin pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head, his chin resting there. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a contented rumble against her back. "About that girl in the coffee shop," she answered softly, "the one who thought she was invisible." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his strong jaw. She could never have imagined this. Kaylin's golden eyes softened, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "I saw her," he said, his voice full of unwavering conviction. "From the very first moment. I saw her then, and I see her now." He leaned down and kissed her. A slow, deep kiss filled with the comfortable, breathtaking intimacy of a love that had been tested by fire and found to be unbreakable. They stood together, a king and queen on their high stone balcony, looking out at the kingdom they had saved and were now nurturing. They were a promise fulfilled, a destiny rewritten. The moon above was no longer a harbinger of a curse, but a gentle, watchful guardian. It was a testament to their love, a love that proved that even in the deepest, darkest woods, a single, pure light was enough to guide the way home. The wolf had found his moon, and together, their reign had just begun.